Good leaders actually lead. Good leaders empower those they lead in the work that is before them. Good leaders nurture other leaders to take up their roles, especially when it is time to move on. Good leaders embrace the season of their leadership and ensure that the work will go on beyond their tenure. Moses was a very good leader because he did all these things. God appointed Moses to lead the community of faith during a critical season of our faith history, from bondage to freedom to the promised land. As we noted last week, Moses was to lead the people up to the land of promise, but not into it. We would think that Moses was such a good and faithful servant that he would be allowed entry into the land, but he was not. It may have been because of his sin at the rock in the wilderness of Zin, or it may have been because of the mandate that the first generation of Israelites were forbidden to enter the land. But I wonder if God's forbiddance of entry by Moses might have been somewhat of a relief to Moses. While the actual story of Moses' death in Deuteronomy claims that he still had a spring in his step, I assume that he was pretty tired of the work and the crowd and the constant effort that he had to put forth. God's decree that Moses was not to enter may have been an incredibly kind gift. His job had been to get the Israelites to Canaan, and he had done that. It was a job well done. If I were in Moses' place, that would have been more than enough for me. What better reward for a servant is there than to die in the arms of God? And Moses literally got to do that. God took Moses up Mount Nebo and showed Moses all the lands that would belong to his people as promised. And there he died in the loving care of the great I Am. Like any good leader, Moses prepared his people for the peaceful transfer of power and leadership. And I guess that's where we got that in the U.S. Moses asked God to name the next leader, and God did, and it was Joshua. Moses laid his hand on Joshua before the entire congregation so that they would know who was now their leader. Joshua took up the reins from Moses, and then Moses climbed the mountain and died. This story reminds me of so much of another really great leader, Martin Luther King Jr. On April 3rd, 1968, the night before he was assassinated, he gave what I consider his most important speech. The reason for the gathering was something most whites don't fully appreciate: the support of the sanitation workers' strike. He spoke that night of the need for unity, the withdrawal of economic support from companies and banks that discriminated against blacks, the human rights of all people around the world, nonviolence, and his own mortality. And he spoke of developing in each of us a kind of dangerous unselfishness. In the speech, he made reference to the story we have been studying during these last several months. He pondered what time he would live in if God gave him the choice. And he began by saying, I would take a mental flight by Egypt, and I would watch God's children in their magnificent trek from the dark dungeons of Egypt, across the Red Sea, through the wilderness, on toward the promised land. And in his speech, Dr. King lifted up the names of other leaders in the movement, leaders who would keep leading. He spoke of the dangers that he had survived and that he was still facing. And he said, and then I got into Memphis. And some began to say the threats or talk about the threats that were out. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers? Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me because I've been to the mountaintop. And I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go to the mountaintop. And I've looked over. And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Martin Luther King did not enter the promised land that he saw from that mountaintop. He was murdered the next day. My family sat in front of the television as the news broke that night. My parents' faces were ashen with grief. It was an unspeakable crime against all people. And my mother could hardly utter a word. But she did tell us of the hope. Years later, when I began reading and listening to King's speeches, this last one meant so much to me. Dr. King had seen what would play out not only in his own life, but in the lives of all those, of all races, freed in so many ways by the civil rights movement. That freedom was given to each and every one of us. Dr. King was the Moses for 2 generations in his time in many sense. And like Moses, he dealt with horrendous times of enslavement, unrest, and the long, long walk to freedom. Moses, too, had been to the mountaintop. Moses had seen the promised land. Moses knew he wouldn't be going into it with his people. But Moses, too, rejoiced that his people would step over into Canaan. Now, some people think it was a great tragedy that Moses wouldn't be able to cross over. Some see it as too great of a punishment. But I wonder if it had been more of a gift to Moses that he would be allowed to die and not make that final journey that would involve even more struggle. He had done what God called him to do, and his task was finished. It was time for others to take up the leadership and move forward. It was time for a new vision, new energy, and new goals. It was a time for all people of Israel to step up and do what they were called to do, not relying on Moses' physical or tangible personality, but relying on their own faith. And Moses would have the privilege of ascending the mountain one last time, and he would have the privilege of dying on that mountaintop, surrounded by the glory of God. We are fortunate to live in this time and this place. Because Jesus died and rose for us and climbed the Mount of Ascension, we are a people in a new promised land. Not a land of buildings and properties and borders, but a spiritual land that is new because of Jesus Christ. It's a land that Moses foresaw, that Dr. King celebrated. We have arrived, and we must ask, what is our godly purpose here? What will we do with the promise that has been fulfilled and handed to us? I believe that Moses would agree with the last words of the last speech of Dr. King. I am so happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing anyone. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.